I remember growing up, my brother and I were just always in competition with each other. We always wanted to outdo each other. And I remember the night that competition kind of came to a head. It was at a buffet restaurant. And we were going back and forth, plate for plate, to see who was going to be crowned the buffet king. And we ate and ate. Chicken drumsticks, macaroni and cheese, salads, and repeat, over and over again. I remember feeling literally like I was going to explode, and I had to tap out. But my brother, not to be outdone, went to the sundae bar, and he made the most giant sundae you ever saw, and devoured it in front of me in victory. I was okay with the defeat. I was especially okay about a half hour later, as we were driving home in the car, sitting in the back seat, and I got to look over and watch my brother spew all over the place. I know you think it's kind of gross, but I had some satisfaction in knowing I ultimately won. Jesus in Matthew 15 is talking about another dinner party. His doesn't end in vomit, but his is interesting. In verse 15, Jesus is eating with some Pharisees, and he and his disciples really upset the Pharisees because they're not eating in the proper way. It starts off, the Pharisees asked, "Why do your disciples break the traditions of the elders? They don't wash their hands when they eat." You see, for the Pharisees, they deemed Jesus and his disciples unclean because of what went into their mouth. And when Jesus saw this as a powerful teaching opportunity, because the truth is, it's not what goes into our mouth that makes us clean or unclean, but rather what comes out. Jesus puts it this way. He says in verse 10, "Listen and understand. What goes into a man's mouth does not make him unclean, but it's what comes out of his mouth. That is what makes him unclean." And Jesus is not talking about vomit like my brother. He's talking about the words, the intentions. He's ultimately talking about the actions. And he's saying that what comes out of the mouth is an overflow of what's in the heart. What comes out of the mouth is kind of what defines the person. Really, Jesus, he picks dinner because it's an illustration. But what he's talking about is the culture. And what he's saying is that as Christ followers, we cannot let the culture define us. Let me ask you, what defines you? When you think about your life, when you think about your possessions, when you think about the things that you buy or own, you think about the things that you love, what is it that you allow to define you? For some of us, it's brands. For some of us, the name on our clothing is so important that if we were being honest, we would have to say that that defines us. Maybe it's the type of phone you have, and that it does this feature or that feature, and if we're being honest, that defines who we are. Why don't you take a moment in your groups and break out and discuss what are some things in our cultures that define you? What is it that defines you? It's an important question for all of us to answer. And if you're still struggling to find that answer, I'll give you a test. Whatever it is that if I took it away, would make you angry, that is what defines you. If you're in a relationship and I made you break up and you would be angry about that, then that is what defines you. If I took away your phone and you couldn't function without it, then that would be what defines you. But my hope is, as followers of God, it would be our relationship with God that defines us. In the Bible, we see this story played out perfectly in the life of David. When Samuel goes to call the next king of Israel, he walks into this home and he sees all these guys, right? He sees like the athletic guy, he sees the nerdy guy, he sees the band geek. I don't know if that is the case, but you see all these different types of people who they thought would make the perfect king, because on the outside it looked like the right type of person. But Samuel wasn't looking on the outside, he was looking at the heart. And that's why he called David. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the strongest, or maybe even the smartest, but he was the one who was defined by God. He was the one that if you took his God away from him, he would be angry. And that, in fact, that is what welled up inside of him as he faced Goliath, that this person was mocking his God. That's who David was. And what David did, his actions came out of the overflow of his heart. And that's exactly what Jesus talked about back in Matthew 15. He says, it's not what goes into your mouth that makes you clean or unclean. And he picks it up in verse 18. He says, but the things that come out of a man's mouth come from the heart. And these make a man clean or unclean. What does your heart look like? Today, right now, if you're being honest, what does your heart look like? David started off with a heart for God, and as you read his story, you see a point in the middle where his heart waned and he gave in to temptation. But in Psalm 51, King David wrote these words, "Create in me a pure heart." What is the condition of your heart? And have you fully allowed God to define your heart? Because when you do, that is when heaven and earth collide.
We're talking about what defines you and creating a clean heart inside you so that you can be a follower and you can be a disciple and you can be a kingdom worker. What I challenge you to do right now is I want you to come up with one thing that is keeping you from having a clean heart, or one area of your life that needs to be cleaned up. Now, here's the next part of that challenge. Now that you have that one area or that biggest area of your life, I want you to go to 3 people that are close to you in your life. They can be your friends, they can be your family, they can be your youth leader. And I want you to ask them, and this is going to be a hard question, ask them what area of your life they believe needs to be cleaned up. Like I said, this is going to be uncomfortable and it's going to take some courage and you're going to have to build up that moment to ask them. But that's okay. And that's what this is about, is this is pushing you forward and challenging you to take that next step to becoming a follower of Christ and moving away from being a fan. Take that list they've given you and compare it with your list. Put those together and then go talk with your leader and put together a plan to attack that area of your life and to go after it with everything you have. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. That's what David said in Psalm 51:10. That's the same attitude you need to have as you go through this process.